So, absolutely delighted to be joined by Alex and Evgenia. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and we are going to be talking about resilience in all its different forms, of course, in the context of Ukraine victory, but also what comes after a Ukrainian victory. So, Evgenia, let's start with you. Please introduce yourself, your work, your area of research.
Thanks a lot. My name is Eugenia Kopytsia, and I am Associate Professor of Environmental Climate and Energy Law, initially from Ukraine, currently based in Oxford, and doing research at the law faculty, looking into the just transitions that are so much important for Ukraine, but as well showcasing how Ukraine is advancing in this domain, rebuilding fast and rebuilding stronger than it was before. Yeah, so that's like a few words about myself. Long talks ahead. And Alex, I would pass on to you.
Hi, Alex Cornell du Houx. I was in the Marine Corps Infantry, Demolitions Rockets, Javelin Missile for about 7 years. And then I was elected to the Maine State Legislature. And then from there, I formed elected officials to protect America and elected officials to protect the Earth on the international side. And I work with the University of San Francisco, running their certificate in public leadership and teaching the classes there.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to talk about resilience. Let's define resilience because of course it covers a huge range of different topics. We're going to focus on energy. We're going to focus on democracy, of course, but also going to talk about veterans as well. But for you, what does that very term resilience actually entail?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually, and possibly I would be the first to take it on because some time ago I started being so curious what resilience means because it has been everywhere, right? Like resilience, psychological resilience, the resilience of the infrastructure, the resilience of communities, the resilience to climate change. And as a boring academic, I was so much wondering, like, what is the answer? And like the one that I really liked, and it's coined to one of the leading academic that made the definition that this is the ability of the system to absorb the stress, but keeping the structure in it. So this means that when the shock comes, the system manages to keep its initial function, its initial structure, and its initial aim. But it looks like this term has been already outdated. And this is what we have seen in Ukraine, because it's not only the ability to respond to shock and to continue being a strong European country defending European values, but this is the ability to leapfrog and the ability to pursue the ambition amidst the constant questions, how are you going to do it? There is the war. And this is what Ukraine is truly the great example for. So for me, resilience is the ability of the system not only to react to the shock, to the stressor, but to advance and to make it better.
And just to dive into that, I mean, sometimes we might mistake the opposite, which is the Russian thing, the ability to absorb pain, the
Right.
ability to absorb trauma at a very high threshold, and confuse that with resilience. Would you say the two are actually very different?
It's so easy to manipulate wording, right? And it's so easy to manipulate terminology. So yeah, little resilience is also the psychological resilience, right? When you under the term resilience, you come up with the vision that we are resilient. This means that we are psychologically stable. But the what Russia has always been good at, it's manipulation of information, misinformation, and disinformation. So they can use any wording and any tool in the way that would be benefiting from them. And people are listening to them. And people being brainwashed, they also dare to spread this information further. So it's not only the mindset and the set of the values of the concrete, like Russian person, but this is something that is being picked up by many countries around the world, not depending like whether they have any relation to Russia or not. And we could see it not only with the Russian misinformation, disinformation, but I would not take this topic of the US recent elections. Possibly it would come up like soon in our conversation, but we should be careful with whom we speak to and what wording we use. And I think this is the greatest sign the greatest condition for resilience, the global resilience.
Alex, what does the term mean to you? What's the scope of resilience in your remit?
So we tend to take the scope from our personal experiences. And when it comes to resilience, obviously my time in the Marine Corps comes up to for the forefront. And there are many times when we're in a combat situation where we're aiming to be resilient as a warfighting advantage, right? And it became very apparent to me energy and water security were two very important components of being resilient. Particularly, there was one time when I came across a line of cars, trucks, and tractors, pretty much as far as the eye could see, and it was just dusk and it was very hazy. So we couldn't quite make out what they were lining up for. And as we got to the beginning of the line, we began to realize they were lining up for oil and gas. And there was about a curfew was about to happen, and our job was to disperse that. They were willing to put their life at risk for this single source of energy. And then it really struck me how geopolitically we are lining up to states like Russia and OPEC, who are all basically autocratic dictators, for this single source of energy. And that is not being resilient at all. That's being dependent. And so working on that energy security, which relates to water, which relates to the health of a community, right? Because it's all connected in the resilience. But when we don't have basic energy security, we're not resilient. And so we began working on how do we have Ukraine lead the world in resiliency through energy security. And that came up with an energy security Marshall Plan for Ukraine.
And this is a crucial topic because there are many aspects that we could cover off. I've just done an interview earlier this afternoon about the resilience of culture. And of course, you'll know that the industrial center of the book industry, book publishing industry in Kharkiv was hit, and one of the main publishers there, and the person I was speaking to actually had a number of books, charred books of their own magazine and journal and writers they cover, and was able to show those on camera. So that's very evocative. Wow. That's one kind of resilience which Russia is trying to erode. It's not working, obviously, on the cultural side. They can erase writers, but the uptake of Ukrainian language is extraordinary. On the other hand, they're hitting energy infrastructure. So this seems to be directly talk to what you've just mentioned here, which is the recognition that everything depends on energy and it's highly tenuous. So what's Russia been doing over the last 3 years to try to destroy Ukrainian resilience through energy?
I would possibly pick on that and then would let Alex continue. Since October 2022, Russia deliberately started targeting the energy infrastructure. And they showed that energy has always been the weapon, but now it was obviously shown that energy is the easiest way to manipulate the country and to threaten, to create the direct threat. So since October 2022, and initially they were targeting the energy distribution systems, much more rare in comparison to the recent attacks. They were aiming at the generation capacities and the grid. There was the huge Russian attack in March-April 2024, due to which we lost 9 gigawatts of the generation capacity, and out of 56 gigawatts that Ukraine had the potential to produce, we actually were producing like around 27. We lost more than the half. So now Ukraine struggles to produce 9 gigawatts. And it is the numbers that were there in place a month ago. And now we have much more destruction that is coming. So by attacking our thermal power plants, by attacking the grid and the distribution capacity, literally Russia wanted Ukraine to turn into the dark. And this is not only about the energy, right? It's about demoralization. Because one thing is that when there is the missile possibility of but the other day, when you have 18 hours per day without electricity, and you can't keep the morale of, like, in any way. The same was happening in summer when it was like the result of these huge attacks. There was the heat wave, plus 40, and people in the concrete jungles of Kyiv, they were choking. and like everyday routine tasks. So you can get adjusted to war. You can get adjusted, and this is what shows the resilience of Ukrainian people on the ground. You can get used to the alerts. You can get used to like the possibility of being hit, but you can't get used to when you every single day you are lacking the basic needs. You can't execute the basic core. So I think that these tactics, it aims at both, right? The distraction, because like the reconstruction of the energy facilities, it can't be done overnight, especially all thermal power plants. So it can take up to 5 years to rebuild the thermal power plant. But secondly, it's destroying of Ukraine's like ability to fight and to continue fighting for what we are fighting for, though it provoked us to show even more resilience that we can do it. And it was like amazing in the summer 2020, in the winter 2022, 2023, like most of the generation capacity was restored and rebuilt. So Ukraine went through 2 winters pretty successfully. This winter is kind of a challenge just because we got the most severe distractions, but we managed to survive 2 winters. Not only survive without the power cuts, like with continuing leading the normal life, what normal can be now. And this is also like the example of resilience, that we have the new norm, we adapted to the new norm, and Ukraine shows it in any areas, including the resilience of the infrastructure. But here I would pass it on to Alex, because I think you are very well placed to tell about Ukraine's experience on investing and introducing the resilient solutions to Ukraine's crisis.
Well, we'll cover that. Let's go on to the air defense first of all, because it wasn't just that Russia suddenly decided to take out the 80% production of the thermal power plant that was hit. It was because the Patriots had run out. It was at the end of the ammunition famine. So that intent to destroy the infrastructure was there all along. It's just the ability to resist it, to be resilient against those attacks, faltered at some point.
And additionally, they're creating more advanced drones and missiles that have abilities to decoy and others. So the technology needs to continue on both sides to be able to keep up the protection of the infrastructure. And unfortunately, when it comes to fossil fuel infrastructure, it is extremely vulnerable, right? They have 6 of these 7 refineries are just destroyed beyond repair. So they have 1 refinery left, which is really important to protect, because then they would have to import every bit of refined petrol, which is a huge liability. So the ability to transition, imagine if they were already fossil-free, there would be an $8 billion trade deficit they wouldn't have, because that's how much they're importing right now. The other issue is, obviously, without electricity, the manufacturing isn't able to happen. It's very hard. So the manufacturing for the war effort, and the additional problem is you have a lot of people leaving Ukraine if there's no electricity. And what Putin wants to have the brain drain go out of it. And so it's strategic why he's doing it. And if you look at the percentage of missiles they're actually hitting targets now, they're increasing because of the lack of really the ammunition to take them out.
And of course, they're using drones, which are relatively low cost per unit, and they're using that to deplete what is quite an expensive air defense structure. And then when they've, exhausted that, then they send the missiles and that kind of stuff. So they're experimenting, innovating, as you say. It's an arms race. I'm interested to tap into this sort of idea of resilience politically and economically, but also tying it in with green, because you're implying here that actually moving to more green technologies is a process of decentralization, and that also provides sort of military strategic resilience as well. Have I got that correct?
No. Energy security, it's the core thing that Ukraine is pursuing, right? But energy security cannot be achieved, and not only in Ukraine, but it can't be achieved without renewables and without the green transition. without energy transition, and we can operate different terms. Again, I'm like a little bit boring academic, so like we have to specify what do we mean by green, because like green, it's just the color, but like the green transition, the clean transition, or just the energy transition, it's enough to highlight that Ukraine that is moving away from the centralized infrastructure, because we have to do that, but as well because we need to do that. So like just transition is not the luxury, energy transition is not the luxury, it's existential, and Ukraine shows it like that. It is the only way to pursue energy security, and by energy security we should understand that this is a national security, and national security is actually European security, and then we come to the global one. Yeah, so
Yeah, absolutely. Clean energy is energy security for Ukraine and the planet. And tactically, we can look at this, and Ukraine has been amazing. They've installed 1.5 gigawatts of solar, and then
during the war.
During the war, right? That's many countries can't even say they've done that. No country can say they've built 19 wind turbines 100 kilometers from the front lines. And wind turbines are quite resilient because they're basically trying to hit a toothpick in a field, and the missile that can take them out costs more than the wind turbine. So all of them are still standing right now, and they're providing power to the community close to the front lines. That's the type of innovation and energy security that Ukraine is moving into and doing right now, and showing the world why it's so important. The UK didn't build a single wind turbine last year, whereas Ukraine did, right?
Onshore.
Yes, onshore.
This is ironic because I was speaking to a chap called Joe Zielinski, who's based in Kharkiv, and he was saying that they were getting fewer power cuts in Kharkiv than when he came over to Lviv.
That's
because
true.
in the western parts you have almost a democratic network effect. Like if we're going to run for 8 hours a day or 6 hours a day, well, everyone has to have their lights off for the same period of time, whether we've got that capacity or not. Whereas they don't want people to leave the frontline zones, so they make sure the power stays on. I mean, does that accord with reality though?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I was just yesterday talking to my father, and he said I'm going to Kyiv, and they say that there are power cuts, but there was none like in Kharkiv, and I just like, how come? And the part of that, like why there are much less cuts, of course we can't manipulate the fact that much, but there is a number of renewable-based projects in Ukraine that are already implemented. Like for example, we have the hospital that is powered by the solar panels on the rooftop, and it's enough, like these solar panels are enough to provide the operational unit continue operating at least for 3 hours, even amid the winter months. So, and this shows the resilience of the system and the resilience of the energy, like of the renewable energy infrastructure. Of course, it's not something that ensures that Kharkiv has less cuts, but it looks smallish, but it works. But it really works, and this is the cost of lives.
And on the aggregate, it's cheaper, it's faster to repair. You can repair solar in a day, and wind has amazing potential across Ukraine. So combined with battery storage, it is the most form of resilient energy that any country can put in place. That's from conflicts from war zones all the way to natural disasters. And we're seeing Ukraine has amazing potential in this. Just 0.4%, 0.4% of its solar capacity can power the entire Ukraine. 0.46% of its wind capacity can power the entire Ukraine. And if you take those numbers out, say, let's power Europe, you could power Europe 3 times over just with wind power with the turbines that are within 10 kilometers of the grid. Combined solar and wind, maybe 7 times over. Various studies debate on how much you could do it, but the big fact is you could power Europe multiple times over just with Ukraine's wind and solar. That's the amount of energy.
I assume that if the hydro is brought back on stream, which of course Kakhovka was hit and that's down, but if that was brought back on stream plus nuclear, we've got the largest nuclear reactor in Europe, then that's a huge energy exporting capacity.
Yeah, people forget how big Ukraine is. It's about the size of Texas in the U.S., and Texas is about a third of the U.S., right? And doing the analogy between Texas and, say, Iowa, where wind energy is combined with agriculture. So in Iowa, 2/3 of the energy is coming from wind because the farmers are getting a consistent revenue from the wind turbines, it doesn't disrupt the crops, and they're getting their crops. And of course, Ukraine is the breadbasket for the world. So it makes a wonderful partnership where they could be providing resilient energy and making the farmers resilient from fluctuations in global prices and weather events.
And this is important. I mean, this is highly speculative, of course. But if we turn to reconstruction and the depopulation that's happened in the east, highly speculative, of course, because we don't know whether those territories will be taken back in the short term, the medium, or the long term. Um, I would speculate that Russia is going to collapse at some point, or there'll be a regime change, which means Ukraine will get those back through either negotiation or some way. But let's assume they come back. Is it going to be far more, not just resilient from a security point of view, but far more economically cost effective to try to rebuild and repopulate the eastern territories with these sort of, again, I'll use the label green, but these resilient technologies from the get-go?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It has been proven and it has been studied and it has been given and we had today fantastic conversations about how China shifted their way towards the development of the clean technologies, not because they are pursuing the green and prosperous vision of their country, but just because they know that this is economically profitable. And obviously, any kind of green transition, shifting to renewables, and it's not only renewables in context of Ukraine, it's not only about solar and wind. We should not forget about biomethane, and Ukraine supported the biomethane pledge at COP28, and we are pursuing this and we're developing it, and this is as well pretty promising area. We are looking into the development of the green hydrogen, and with the perspective for the development then of the green steel and transformation of our steel industry into the one that would be not only acknowledged by the European Union but accepted of the highest standards. So definitely it is economically feasible, it's economically profitable, and initially Ukraine pursued the vision of building back better. Then we added there the point building back greener, and we got the support of the international partners a lot with this vision, because we had the lessons from the Second World War, right? How Germany managed to rebuild with the support of the international community into one of the most advanced economies till recently. But anyway, so this is how it works, and I think nobody is questioning that. The only question that arises that we should do it now. And unless we do it now, because reconstruction is not the question of the post-war. You absolutely correctly referred that sooner or later Russia will collapse, sooner or later war finishes. We don't have the privilege of time. We are doing it now. We're reconstructing our city now. We're shifting to renewables now. So the key point that we have to understand that this is something that should be done now. We are not postponing to the future, because the future is very abstract. We need the action now.
No, that's absolutely true. One of the reasons why we formed a Ukraine Energy Security Marshall Plan is we brought the major think tanks together, the academics, Oxford Net Zero, USF, and so forth, the State Department, and the elected officials from Ukraine, from the US, from the UK, together, because the action has to happen at this moment. If we wait, it's too late, and then Putin actually wins because a country cannot function without energy security. And so as a result of the Ukraine Energy Security Marshall Plan, we're looking at what policies we can change that provide the economic incentives, the geopolitical risk insurance, right? What policies we can shift in the encourage wind and solar to come into Ukraine. Then the sister cities, how we're bringing regional area, states, oblasts and states together, the cities together, to cooperate on that, and then on the ground, what are the solutions where we can encourage investment and direct aid, and bringing all those together, how they work together. Obviously, when we can tweak a policy within the EU, UK, US, to provide the aid coming in or provide the investment abilities to come in, then it's going to help the cities implement and work together and form the technical assistance and sharing, and it will help the folks in the US too, because they'll want to work with Ukraine to make their cities more resilient, because resiliency is across the world we need. Yeah. And there are many natural disasters that are happening in the US that we need to be resilient from as well. And this is why the Department of Defense in the US is taking it very seriously. every Army base by 2035 will be an independent, smart microgrid that's clean energy powered. And the rest of the branches have a very similar plan. Because they know that they need the bases to be resilient from future climate disasters and future conflicts. And so we're already doing this right now. In fact, when we had a massive heat wave in California, Miramar was able to take itself off the grid to support the state. One small example of it happening, whereas in Ukraine, that's life-saving.
And that's extraordinary, isn't it? And that undercuts a lot of the political messages, the conservative political message that climate change isn't happening, blah blah blah. I mean, clearly the science states otherwise, but when you have military money behind innovation, then stuff tends to happen at scale potentially and faster. And this is especially important for Ukraine, isn't it? Because we've talked about the economy, but actually right now, maybe one of the most important developments is the evolution of the military-industrial complex in Ukraine. The combination of the sort of almost Silicon Valley ethos in Lviv and the tech parks there and in Kiev, combined with more traditional engineering skills. And we're starting to see European countries, Denmark especially, as well as Germany, getting around their own internal political blocks by investing in Ukraine and letting Ukraine get on and build the stuff at lower unit cost and with the innovation there. But that is an incredibly energy-hungry industry, isn't it?
Yes.
As well as tech itself, powering all those servers and so on. Those don't have to be sited in Ukraine, I guess.
Oh, yeah. When I was deployed, I would have loved to have an electric-powered vehicle to do our overwatch and patrols on, because it's low heat signature and it's quiet, right?
Not a Cybertruck.
They're not bullet resistant that much. But the ability for us to have a warfighting advantage with clean energy is extremely clear. That's why the Department of Defense and others, and again, I'm speaking on my behalf, not the DoD or anyone, are investing in clean energy. From hybrid ship engines, that means we can tell, hey, Scotty, divert the power to the weapon systems. You can't do that with a steam diesel generator, right? So that which includes directed energy weapon systems, right? So clean energy provides an independent operating. There's panels out there. We just met with a company. They just roll up, the panels open up basically, and they go down, and you can connect them like Lego blocks. And you can put that anywhere within hours and have resilient energy that's mobile to power the warfighting ability. So clean energy is also a warfighting advantage.
And to power AI, that is more and more energy demanding.
Of course. Well, we won't talk about autonomous drones and stuff.
All
That's
right.
a topic for another conversation, probably. But
Absolutely.
there are other aspects to resilience. I mean, let's have a mention again of green steel. I think we'd do a separate episode on that. But heavy industry is also something that potentially is not necessarily economically anymore a huge advantage. But of course, if you are going to retain some kind of resilience and reduce your dependency on China, for instance, then some heavy industry needs to come back and be under your strategic control. In that sense, we're going to see a return of steel production in Ukraine, but not necessarily on the sort of Soviet grand scale of Azovstal or these kind of plants.
But it's not only not necessarily. We can't do this on the old Soviet Union basis. We can't do this not about the moral coming back to the old structures or systems, but first and foremost, Ukraine is the candidate member to the European Union. This means that we are now working hard to align the legislation, our industry standards, with the EU standards. We can no longer afford ourselves to operate the old Soviet system just because it would make our products not able to compete on the European market. And with this, we have CBAM. European Union introduced CBAM, its carbon border adjustment mechanism, that would cause the huge burden for Ukraine and huge economic losses unless we adjust our standards to the European ones. And what Ukraine is currently doing, and this is fantastic, we are doing this during the war. We are doing it despite the war, despite all of the challenges. We are now developing the national emission trading system in Ukraine. in order to make it more aligned with the similar one existing in European Union and creating the grounds for such big, like the heavy industries being compatible, not compatible, but competitive on the European market. So it's not now even the choice of it, like it's the obligation. And like Ukrainian vision of being a European nation has always been grounded on the fact that we are European, we are Europe, and the fact that we were allowing ourselves a little bit lagging behind was fighting with this Soviet legacy. But we were always European minded. And now it's not even the question that we are going to come back to the previous state. Now, we want Europe, we are Europe, and we're doing all what we can to align our industries, to align our economy with European one. And we will do it.
And with that, just quickly, they're in the top, they're the number 3 energy potential country within Europe. So, but Spain and France don't have the ability to implement as quickly. It can take 5 years to get some power plants permitted and ready in the other countries like that. But Ukraine is doing it right away. And so they have the ability to help Europe actually move off of gas and oil quicker than any country in Europe.
Again, that's ironic that what Putin wanted to do is make Europe energy dependent, and he's accelerated the decoupling from Russian energy, which is extraordinary. Yes. And this existential fear that, of course, his regime has of people dropping oil and moving on to other. Well, he's accelerated that as well through his actions. We're going to cover off in a minute, sort of veterans affairs, I think, and I think that's incredibly important to do so. But let's quickly touch upon Trump, not necessarily in the political sense, because whatever way he goes, it seems it will still encourage more domestic production of European arms industry, and Ukraine, it would seem, would be at the forefront of that. The ability to innovate, the ability to test stuff in the field, unfortunately, but we know that in military technology that's a huge advantage to have that sort of that evolutionary arms race, and that pressure creates innovation, which is very hard to match in other countries. If Trump decouples from NATO, then there'll be a race to rearm. If Trump says, we'll support Europe, but you need to get your investment in arms up to 2.5–3%, there will be an arms race and a reinvestment. So whichever way Trump goes, it looks like we're on an inevitable path of a huge increase in money towards military industrial complex. And Ukraine could be at the forefront of that. In fact, Zelensky's victory plans sort of explicitly states that not just Ukrainian industry, but Ukrainian troops could end up being, in some ways, the guardians of Europe if the US is to withdraw, either through agreement collaboratively or in a far more chaotic and concerning fashion.
Yeah, and no matter how they do it, the part of it needs to be their resilience and independence from Russian oil, because still $400 a person has been spent supporting Putin in Europe. If you were to take the money that Europeans collectively spent literally giving Putin the money for bombs and bullets and munitions, right? But they're doing really well. I mean, for the first time, wind overtook the gas production, right, and the amount of capacity that was generated last year. So it's on the right trajectory, but it still needs to accelerate. And again, that's where Ukraine can be part of the solution, both in the manufacturing and the production, but also in the energy usage and production of clean energy that makes everyone more secure.
Well, we're going to tackle the last topic here, because there are a million things we talk about, but I think we'll plan future episodes. But this one is on veterans affairs, and I'm going to put it to both of you, but a slightly different angle. To Ievgeniia, the idea of resilience here is, can there be true democratic resilience in a post-war state? One perhaps envisages a point where normal politics resumes, Zelensky perhaps moves on, and the cut of thrust in politics is back. And with a huge influx of money coming into Ukraine, there is the risk, of course, of a re-emergence of Soviet oligarchic type of influence, money pooling in certain areas, and of course Russia can use that. Russia will
Yeah, of
use
course.
that influence to try and corrupt society. But I think perhaps more importantly, if veterans are excluded from this reconstruction process, that could be extremely destabilizing. So I'd like to talk about, with you, that resilience of democratic inclusion and how that can be enshrined within reconstruction programs. And then Alex, maybe let's talk about that inclusion from the point of view of things like infrastructure, uh, mental health support, and how inclusion could be part of the way in which the physical and mental trauma of service people are actually addressed by giving them role and responsibility, as opposed to feeling like a burden or lost direction.
Yeah, thank you very much for such a complex, yeah, and like multifaceted question. Because first, I wanted to just very quick comment. Ukrainian society has changed a lot, and it changed drastically since 2014, and then it accelerated and transforming the way we perceive and what we allow drastically since 2022. So we won't allow oligarchs emerging or coming back. So I think that the level of the civil resilience, yeah, let's call it like that, if we're using this word today in this context, would guarantee that the democratic values are there. It would be much harder to implement it and execute in the context of the financial constraints, if we have it and if we are not backed up enough by the international partners. But I think that the demand is there. So understanding what is right, what is wrong, has sharpened in Ukraine, and we would not allow anything that is not aligned with our vision of Ukraine as the country that is pursuing and having these strong democratic values and strong democratic institutions. And like this is what differs Ukraine pre-2014 from Ukraine like that is now. In the context of the veterans, now they are tailored policies that are looking into the inclusion of the veterans in the post-reconstruction process. But again, I would have this underlined. Reconstruction is happening now. So what we need to ensure, what Ukraine needs to ensure, again with the help of the international partners, that the veterans are being included now. Because I met a couple of the people already that are considered to be veterans. That have this veteran status already, and the inclusion of them and including them into the decision making would heighten the risk, would lower the risk and heighten the probability that the decisions being made now are a little bit more popular than they are, because we have this strong now fatigue among Ukraine's society. And we should understand that unless we talk to people and unless the government listens to people, it will not go well. So taking on the optimistic point, we should listen to veterans now. So we should listen to people who have been there since 2014, not since 2022, because the war is 2014. And we should include them already now into the tailored policies that would consider not only the inclusion of the veterans in the future, but the future of the whole Ukrainian society and the way where our country will be going.
What's more important, their inclusion in politics or their actual inclusion in reconstruction business ventures to ensure that the opportunities are there?
Everywhere. With inclusion into politics, it can be the tricky one, but this is the separate discussion, right? But everywhere, of course, but this is Alex expertise and experience, but inclusion veterans into the businesses, small and medium enterprises that would be specially supported and then for veterans in Ukraine. Something like it was in Forrest Gump, when he was happily owning the shrimp company and then the Apple company, right? like some fruit company and invested in the fruit company that appeared to be the Apple one. So we should see it more and more. So creating the favorable conditions like for the veterans to start small and medium enterprises, that's for sure. But it will be all there if we listen to the veterans, and we should start listening to the veterans now.
So from the international to local, when it comes to oligarchs and dictators, one of the best benefits for them is centralized fossil fuels, because by definition it is one in certain specific areas that they can control. Clean energy, on the other hand, by just its nature, is distributed across many different places. So it's very hard to centralize it, particularly when you put the right policies in to make sure that it can, small and medium-sized businesses can work with the energy that is local to the community. And so by its nature, and this is why China, for instance, is great for it at home, because they want to, it's cheaper and it's more effective and it's cleaner, so their citizens don't rebel against them. But internationally, only 1% of the BNR initiative, the Belt and Road, is clean energy, because they're investing, say, $100 billion in petrochemicals and other places, and because their friends are mostly the autocratic dictators, and they want those countries to be dependent on them. And so, as a result, we can see clean energy can naturally, in Ukraine and around the world, provide for a better infrastructure that is more democratic and harder to centralize, that oligarchs can take control of. They could still do it, but it's a lot harder.
And let's say wealth inequalities are often associated with these very extraction-oriented type economies, and in Russia perhaps is the worst example, where you have the most, some of the richest stuff you can dig out of the ground, combined with an extreme hierarchical system and an imperial mindset. That's the worst combination of those three.
Yeah.
But having wealth inequality is always going to be an issue, isn't it, for democratic inclusivity?
Having more inclusive and distributed energy, literally, is a structural advantage to have more equality. And then that's why we're saying having the veterans engaged and involved, particularly when it comes to the ability for small and medium-sized enterprises and businesses to populate this amazing form of energy that can happen across Ukraine and Europe, and frankly, what we need in the world. Particularly for veterans and the families, it's really important to not think about mental health in just one area, because Tier 1 mental health is emotional intelligence, mindfulness, well-being. Tier 2 is social workers, and particularly in a challenging population. And then Tier 3 is one-on-one with a psychiatrist. It's very expensive to do the one-on-one for everyone, but ensuring that we have policies where Tier 3 for everyone. Tier 1 is least expensive and very easy to implement to the families and folks coming home. Because when you're on the front lines, the amount of PTSD isn't very high, because you have a clear purpose and mission. It's when you get back, and the families who have been struggling the entire time too, and actually have higher PTSD rates than the people on the front line, and then obviously that changes when you get back. Having those skill sets for the community, the families, the school systems is really important, and integrating it with the workforce. So part of the Ukraine Energy Security Marshall Plan we have is ensuring when we're doing the job training for solar and wind and other installations, which veterans can be inherently great at. I mean, down the line, offshore wind, say in the Black Sea, Navy folks are very used to going in a small boat next to the turbine, climbing into the small places, right? But that's just one area where vets are inherently great already at this type of energy. And then having a purpose and a job to work on, combined with ensuring that the Tier 1 mental health is there to make this community more resilient, so the actual need for investment in Tier 2 and Tier 3 mental health becomes less. And we actually were able to pass a bill in Hawaii that focused on that as the first in the nation bill, and we'll have 10 pilot schools going in the process. So that could be a model we could look at for some schools in in Ukraine.
The last question then, and this is one for both. A really important part of Ukraine being a resilient economy, a self-sufficient economy, a viable economy as well, is to get people who are currently abroad for very good reasons, to encourage as many of them as possible to return home with their families, and I'm sure that energy resilience plays a role in that, because if there's a chance of opportunity, of wealth generation, as well as cheaper and more democratically available power, that's part of this whole struggle to get Ukraine's people back, get its population and demographics back on a healthy track.
Yeah, there was the very great study made by Razan, and they calculated that green jobs, that clean energy would generate up to 4 million green jobs in Ukraine. So this means that people can be sure that once coming back to Ukraine, they are able to be paid, that they will have the possibility of development, and that they will use the knowledge and skills they gained abroad, because most of the families they are abroad studying, or like pursuing new professions, having new profession that they, and there are a lot of such professions like in clean energy, like in the countries around the world, that they can apply it in their home country. So yeah, obviously this is the great way to motivate. And we all want a home. Like there is no place like home. And it's like once the situation stabilizes, an average Ukrainian that is now in any other country, is like outside of Ukraine, would love to go back. Would love to go back.
And to put it into a very tangible example, right? So we run a certificate in public leadership through the University of San Francisco that brings lawmakers and folks on the ground making solutions from around the world. And they form policy teams. And one of those policy teams, they compete for a prize. And the one that won this time around, their idea was to put wind turbines on the Ukrainian farmland that has been mined. And because you can make a narrower path to put the turbines on, you don't have to demine everything. And then once you start generating the revenue from the turbines, you start demining the rest and using regenerative agriculture to bring the land back to its healthy, amazing state that it was before. And in that process, you're creating consistent jobs, because the turbines have good family-sustaining jobs forever, because of the maintenance and the replacement after 25, 30 years. And at the same time, you're rebuilding the agriculture sector that Ukraine is worldwide known for. So it's amazing to see some of these policy data, but that came from the Ukrainians, the UK and the US and others coming together, making these plans. And that's one small example of how the ingenuity and the creativity of folks in Ukraine are really will help rebuild the country and lead the world in how we can be more resilient from an economic, from a cultural, and from an energy standpoint, to protect our planet and protect Ukraine at the same time.
And that's a brilliant story. I mean, this is one of the most sort of optimistic and encouraging episodes we have done on the channel. And I think it's good to look forward, because I get the impression that Ukrainians are naturally forward-looking, always imagining the future rather than picking at the scabs of the past, which is the habit of the other place. So this is an inspiring sort of episode from that point of view. And yeah, we hope to be able to record more on these topics as they evolve.
Okay. Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.